Alrighty, so I'm Danny. Hello, you probably already know that, or at least I should hope. If you don't, I don't know why you're watching this video. It's kind of weird, but yeah, so I'm going to be reading the narrative document for Guilds of Greybrook. I'm expecting that to take an amount of time. I don't know how long. I hope it won't be too long, but I can't promise anything. I'm going to try and stick to just kind of reading what's written here, maybe jump in to offer some of my own opinions or notes here and there, but I have a tendency to ramble and I don't want this to go on for too long, so I'm going to try and keep that to a minimum however possible, but no promises. Yeah, I guess I'll just probably just hop right into this. Hopefully, to those working on the project, this will be of some benefit. If you have any questions about anything that's here, or just want to talk about it, or have any opinions or criticisms, even, feel free to let me know. Send me a text, talk to me in class, or wherever it is that we find ourselves. And yeah, there's a bit of a beginning section here, a small little paragraph about, what is Guilds of Greybrook. This was originally made for our narrative team. But I'm going to kind of skip past that and get straight into the narrative layer. And also, sorry for any extra noises that the mic might be picking up. I hope there aren't that many, but as I'm going to be shifting around in my chair here, and I don't know what my hands are going to be doing, fidgeting or something. I don't know. I have no intention of editing any of that out. So if there's goofs and weird audio bugs, then that's a shame, and I'll feel bad about it. The narrative layer. Guilds of Greybrook may be a very systems-heavy experience, but it is held up by its flavorful presentation and immersive narrative framework. The players should feel invested in the work they're doing, as managerial as it may be. The world should feel complex and intricate with its own history, geography, politics, and cultures. The same goes for the world's characters and factions. This all goes towards making the player more invested in their experience. We want them to care about the world their guild resides in, as well as the effects that their actions have on the denizens of Briaria, either as it relates to their guild or simply in general. Systems is in charge of making the player's choices feel weighty mechanically. Narrative is in charge of eliciting such feelings emotionally. I put down a few inspirations on the speaker's note for this page. I listed Papers, Please, Root, Fallout New Vegas, Outer Rim, Game Dev Simulator, Dredge. Some of these are more mechanically based picks, but in general, I think these are all great examples of games that do elicit an amount of narrative experience in the player, even at the most systems based, like Root, for example, kind of encourages players to craft their own stories and attachments to what is happening in game as you're playing. Okay, that wasn't too bad. We can do this. On to slide 2. Incredible. The story at large. Guilds of Greybrook takes place in a harsh world at the edge of where grand civilizations are crafting their great historic narratives. Greybrook is a bit of a backwater town located in what is a bit of a backwater peninsula, Briaria. Aluminisil, the region's imperial rulers, currently have their attention fixed towards far-off overseas conflicts, and have therefore left very little of their governing authority in the area. Many people do live on the peninsula of Briaria, however, relatively unimpressive as it may be, and this land matters a whole lot to its inhabitants. Those with greater aspirations have been given the perfect opportunity to sow their influence over the peninsula's future, while the current governor, Autumn Fulton, struggles to keep order. The most major of these factions vying for power are the Alteran Church and the Freedoms Company, who compete for the very fate of the region's future. Other influential but more minor factions include the Dawn Choir, Revelark University, and the Traders Union. At the beginning of our game, the player has set up shop in the long defunct Greybrook Adventurers Guild, Abandoned by its previous owner many years ago for reasons unknown. With the governor's grip on the region weakened, there's a clear gap in the market for such services. Ruffians and bandits have taken to harassing towns and travelers alike. The common people are willing to pay good money for protection. Similarly, the many factions of the peninsula see many possible uses for an organization such as the Guild. The struggling economy of the region has also left many more than willing to try a new and adventurous career choice. Briaria is a bountiful and unattended dumpster. Its denizens a swarm of hungry rats, and the player runs the Rat Pinkertons, essentially, ready to play whatever side is most advantageous to them. Dirty, underhanded conflict is sure to break out from these conditions, and it is up to the player to navigate the instability of the times, or perhaps to even profit off of them. If one plays their cards right, the future of Briaria may just rest in their hands. So, a note I put here is essentially me pondering a little bit about what our real-world equivalencies are to what the player is doing in this game. I think we've talked about this a good deal as a team, about how we're really focusing on the guild as a commentary on unregulated business in the real world. The closest comparisons to draw from, since Adventurers Guilds, which is really kind of was our original inspiration, are more of a like high fantasy trope. Our closest real comparisons are things like mercenaries and the Pinkertons, from kind of 20th century American history, where, work for hire, right? So we've got a bunch of dudes willing to take up contracts for whoever's willing to pay the highest bidder, right? We're going to be working with all sorts of factions and larger organizations. I think the direct words I put here are, I can't stress enough how much our guild's closest real-world parallel is either mercenaries or the Pinkertons. Like y'all, it's fucked up. This is good though. That's what we want. This is how we get them. So I was obviously kind of in a mood there. And honestly, I think the me that wrote that's pretty based. And I wish I had that courage. Moving on to page 3, the vibes and themes. The world of Guilds of Greybrook is one of low medieval fantasy. The supernatural exists in the ways that it does in old European folklore and fairy tales, leaning heavily on a sense of societal fear of the unknown. In general, we want to keep our supernatural cards close to our chest, in order to preserve the spooky enchantment of the genre. The woods are dangerous and ensorcelled, and filled with who knows what. Better not to stray from the path. Strange beasts do live in our world, but the more supernatural they get, farther removed from the public conclusivity they should be. Spellcasting is practiced, but not tremendously common, mostly wielded by priests, druidic witches, or the rare academic. Societally, we have a world that is relatively equitable when it comes to race, gender, and sexuality. Our main points of societal inequity and commentary, as they directly begin to touch on those of the real world, are based in religion, economy, and class. The player is just as involved in the politics of the region as anyone else, and we really want them to feel that. Whether they like it or not, the guild is as an important peninsular power with a near monopoly on the type of service it provides. Not only does the player hold influence in the world at large, but also over the inhabitants of Greybrook and the members of their guild. We aim to make some commentary on the dangers of unchecked and unregulated business. While the player certainly does not hold all the cards in the region, they still hold a position of power. Players might fire members to cut costs or meddle in the affairs of regional factions to make a quick buck. This does not mean that we are trying to brand the player or even their business as evil, but their effect on the world should be no joke, and certainly not come across as trivial. By taking the player's decisions seriously, even the most minor of administrative decisions, we are enabling them to immerse themselves in even the most managerial of game options. Optimizing a firm can be very rewarding, but it should also be a serious matter with real consequences. I wrote here in the notes, it's as simple as realizing the player will start to hate the guy who comes to collect the government's taxes. These are the sort of emotional reactions that the game will thrive on. The rest should come naturally. Yeah, this is essentially saying, once we get the player to care about the guild, things that affect the guild will kind of easily elicit an emotional reaction from there. And this is our event system. This is any kind of interesting cause and effect reactivity that we can include in the game. Let's see. Moving on, let's start talking about the world a little bit. So, welcome to Briaria. Here you have a map of Briaria. It is only going to be on this slide, but it contains all the locations that we are going to cover on the peninsula in the next few slides. So feel free to take a look at it now if you want. Or, I don't know, you guys also have access to these slides, so do what you will. Or don't look at all, you know? You might be doing something else right now. You might be at your computer and I'm in the background and I'm talking while you're doing art, maybe programming. These are very normal things that I could see happening. So if you don't want to look, it's kind of a landmass. Yeah, it's hard to explain. You know, it's going to be off screen in a little bit, and if you didn't look, you're missing out. I don't know what I'm doing. The lay of the land. Briaria is a habitable peninsula on the continent of Jadoon. The territory falls under the imperial governance of Aluminicil, although their grip on the region has always been relatively lax given its distance from the main body of the empire, which is located on the continent of Lacedon. Its current governor, Autumn Fulton, is a weak-willed ruler from a wealthy military family. They govern the territory from the city of St. Isidore, near the northernmost point of the peninsula. The grand majority of Jadoon consists of a harsh, mountainous tundra known as the White Wastes, and is mostly unsuitable for habitation. Briaria, in contrast, has a temperate climate with large seasonal changes. The peninsula is heavily forested with a smattering of plains to the north, mountainous cliffs to the west, and damp marshlands to the east. I've talked a little bit about this to the team in class, but Briaria is historically parallel to the likes of Iceland, having no single native population. The first to ever inhabit the peninsula did so before it became an Aluminicilian settlement, although they themselves were from Lacedon. Funnily enough, most of the peninsula's first settlers were actually from Durheld. Some of these terms will maybe mean more later. The currency of the land is in the form of gold coins called skies. I don't remember writing that down, but I do remember having a conversation about it. So I guess at some point I decided, or a decision maybe was made on that. I don't know. Let's see. Quester Bay. The large inlet that occupies the northwesternmost portion of the peninsula is known as Quester Bay, named after the Aluminicilian explorer who first discovered the region, Matthew Quester. Briaria's two oldest and largest settlements border the bay, St. Isidore and Ceramona. St. Isidore is a wealthy seaside city and the de facto capital of the Briarian Peninsula. It houses Vedelkin Tower, from which the governor presides over the region. The tower is named after Thomas Vedelkin, Briaria's first ever appointed governor. St. Isidore is also greatly influenced by the presence of the Alteran Church, being the location of the Cathedral of the Sacred Mysteries, the peninsula's largest church/observatory, as well as where many parishes of Briaria report to. Where the many parishes of Briaria report to. Bear with me, guys. Ceramona is Briaria's biggest trade hub and its largest population center. Its harbor is famous for its size, welcoming vessels from across the known world. The city benefits greatly from the region's connections to Aluminicil, which brings trade opportunities with a variety of overseas territories. The Traders' Union's Grand Bazaar is also located here, an enormously diverse market at the center of the city. Daggered Rocks. The coastline above Ceramona is dangerous to navigate. Sharp cliffs and rock beds jut out from the bay and keep all but the most intrepid captains at a distance. This makes the caves at Daggered Rocks the perfect place for Sasha Asterholt's bandits to hide out. Pirates have also been known to park their vessels here, popping out from behind jagged rock formations to plunder ships on their way to Ceramona. So yeah, Quester Bay area, if you remember from the map before, this is kind of that large inlet near the top of the map. Kind of going into a little bit of detail about some of these, the flavor of some of these towns of St. Isidore and Ceramona. These are both highly populated towns that lean towards support of the Alteran Church, generally. Especially Saint Isidore, right? It's the capital, it's where the governor resides, and the governor, of course, is receiving a lot of support from the Alteran Church right now in order to keep the status quo in check. It's where the big cathedral of the Sacred Mysteries is, which is both a cathedral and an observatory, because we kind of have a old Romance era Catholic sort of interest in science going on with the Alteran Church, and that coupled with the fact that they're literally, an organization that cares about the stars. They use it as their iconography and as part of their just theology in general. It just seemed really cool and interesting to kind of have their uh, their biggest location on the continent to also kind of double almost as a bit of a scientific observatory. Um, Ceramona, similarly, the Traders Union cares about trade, cares about keeping things stable. Residents of Ceramona mostly, are pro the church. They tend to lean that in that direction. But it's much more so the Traders Union, of course, which is located there. And so, depending on where the Traders Union kind of falls over the course of the game, Ceramona's general interests might sway in that same direction. Cardabri, an expanse of hilly meadows. Not metals. An expanse of hilly meadows dots the northern reaches of Briaria, boasting the vast majority of the peninsula's farmland. Cardabri is quite tranquil by the standards of the land, relatively unbothered by trouble other than farming disputes, wild animals, and the occasional harsh storm. The region's people are proud but bickersome, constantly requiring third party assistance to resolve small conflicts with their local communities. Rivulet is the largest town in Cardabri. It's home to Harvest Hall, a large farmers market and pillarstone of Briaria's agricultural community. The town is also the location of Revelark University's campus, a prestigious institution that many of the peninsula's working stiffs dream of sending their kids to someday. Yeah, so Rivulet, very similar to um, the towns mentioned earlier. I'm going to go into a bit of detail about like where they lean, I guess politically a little bit. Similar to Ceramona, they lean technically into their like local faction, which is Revelark University, which by default leans towards the Freedoms Company. But of course, the whims of Revelark University might sway the whims of the town, whatever that means. Yeah, and Cardabri is just this big, you know, uh, farmland area towards the north of the map, towards the north of the peninsula. The Yammerwoods. A vast majority of central Briaria is covered in a dense forest known as the Yammerwoods. Its thick canopy makes it so that even on the sunniest of days, the sun does very little to illuminate its detritus. Most travelers loathe to journey through the Yammerwoods, and those who have once often never do again, opting to take an expensive and time consuming passenger vessel around the exterior of the peninsula rather than risk the peril of traveling through its brambled heart. None of the supernatural rumors that surround the forest have been confirmed, however, which is not to say that the woods don't harbor many dangers. Bears, stags, and giant spiders and dire wolves plague the depths of the Yammerwoods and occasionally cause havoc outside of its borders as well. And we're keeping that in too. It's incredible. This is how we do it in showbiz. Greybrook. Greybrook is the heart of the player's business operations and guilds of Greybrook. This small town contains a general store, an apothecary, a blacksmith, a church, an inn, a graveyard, and, of course, a guild hall. Greybrook is considered a bit of a backwater town, even by the standards of Briaria, but its populace has a reputation for being fierce and resilient. They must be in order to make a home for themselves in the midst of the dangerous Yammerwoods. Trench Ridge. The mountainous terrain makes. I guess if I just to say to kind of contextualize the Emeralds, that's most of the central glut of the continent. It's very wooded, very the woods is such an important part of like the trope space for the type of game and the type of kind of frontier adventure that a lot of our like lingering fantasy inspirations come from. And the Amberwoods is that for us, right? It's this thick forest that occupies much of the heart of the continent, and Greybrook, of course, is right near the middle of it all. Trenchridge. The mountainous terrain makes living in Trenchridge a difficult prospect. Its inhabitants survive by knowing their way around the region's sparse trails and by avoiding staying out at night. The range is about as lawless as it gets in Briaria, being located as far away as it is from St. Isidore at a time in which Aluminisil is doing very little to reinforce the peninsula. Its arid cliffs once were home to multiple promising archaeological sites. These were quickly deserted and abandoned, however, when crime rates rose in the area. Bastionville, also known as Liberty. Once the beating heart of the peninsular economy, due to its prosperous iron mines, the discovery of a powerful metal overseas called doctrite has left the city's ore beds abandoned. Now the promise of revolution has breathed life back into Bastionville as the Freedoms Company has made the city, which they have renamed Liberty, into their base of operations. Now its mines and forges have been reawakened, crafting weapons for the insurgents. Ashgrove. Ashgrove is amongst the smallest of settlements on the Briarian Peninsula. Many workers moved here after the mines closed down in Bastionville, and ever since the town has been a little more than a rest stop to many travelers. Its biggest claim to fame nowadays is the Burial Mound, a bar, distillery, and boxing ring, famous for knocking its guests out cold in a menagerie of ways. So, Trenchridge is sort of on the bottom left-hand side of the map. It's this really mountainous region. It's where a lot of old mines were. Back when the peninsula was a much better economic state. A lot of those mines have since closed, and their workers, disgruntled with the state of the peninsula and the state of their lives, eventually kind of became the foundation of what is now the Freedoms Company. Bastionville, of course, is the heart of Freedoms Company operations, similar to what St. Isidore is for the church. And, whatever the Freedoms Company says there goes. Ashgrove is, it's a working town filled with some disgruntled and also some nasty folks. This is a bit of a lawless region of the peninsula. So Ashgrove kind of generally tends to sympathize with the Freedoms Company. And they don't have kind of a home faction necessarily to sway them otherwise. But they have a decent amount of influence by the revolution. Merkmere. On the westmost reaches of the peninsula, the thick Yammerwoods forest gives way to the desolate swamps of Merkmere. Few travelers journey here, as there is little of merit to find other than strange plant life, exotic bugs, and venomous beasts. Most attempts to tame the region have failed tremendously. The particularly foggy peninsula, now known as Vanisher's Point, was once supposed to be the site of a great new lighthouse. After 3 construction crews went missing, the Empire gave up on eastern expansion altogether. Fogwater is a remote fishing village that mostly keeps to itself. Its inhabitants are used to the difficulties of living in the marsh and have done relatively well for themselves despite the local conditions. Many of its inhabitants credit the success to the community's unwavering faith in the Alteran Church, while others make note of Ibrahim Fadel, an enigmatic medical scholar who set up shop in the remote village not long ago for unknown reasons. So yeah, Merkmere is it's a swampy region. It makes up the kind of rightmost reaches of the map. It's this marshy terrain, and its only real settlement is Fogwater, which is this like weird, really remote fishing town, about as deep into the swamps as you can get. And they're kind of a remote religious community, so they support the Alteran Church kind of by default. But they also have amongst their midst Dr. Ibrahim Fadel, who's from Emeritus, who's our third large international nation, which I think I'll be getting to in a moment here. A lot of these small details about the towns, like locations or landmarks that exist within them, are mostly reference materials to kind of spur the imagination of our narrative designers, as well as myself. It's those kinds of wrinkles that hopefully extrapolate into larger ideas and concepts and essentially act as toys to play around with on a narrative level. But yeah, Lacaron. The far off continent of Lacaron is the motherland to all culture and civilization on Briaria. The vast continent contains three primary civilizations and boasts a rather diverse ecosystem. Generally, for the purposes of our world, Lacaron is a parallel to Europe, and its few countries to European powers. Aluminicil. Aluminicil is a large world power that governs over many overseas territories, including Briaria. It is a cultural parallel to southwestern European countries such as Spain and France. Cities within the mainland empire that characters in the world may reference include the nation's capital, Ursula, as well as the cities of Telmin and Campanas. They are currently at war with the Kingdom of Emeritus, an even further off empire of enormous magnitude that takes most of its influence from North Africa. Durheld is the second largest country on Lacaron. They put a lot of funds into exploration and scientific developments, but have a very poor military presence. This nation takes most of its cultural influence from northern European countries such as Germany, England, Ireland, and the Netherlands. Cities within its borders include Inet, the nation's capital, as well as the cities of Gobshire and Nuenic. So I think if I look at the notes here, I have some notes about terminology that I hope is relatively intuitive. When I say aluminicelian, I mean from aluminicel. When I say Helden, that's from Durheld. So those are our main two civilizations. Most people on Briaria are settlers from one of those two nations, or are descended from settlers from one of those two nations. There are also people who are from Emeritus, which is this farther off third country, inspired by North Africa, that is currently at war with Aluminicel. The war in question being that which is drawing the Empire's attention away from Briaria and causing this sort of drought of funds and attention that is causing a lot of the conflict that we see on the peninsula over the events of this game. The factions. Oh boy. So, the guild. The player is not the first to try and start a guild in Greybrook, but Briaria has never been in as much turmoil as it is now. Its crumbling infrastructure and factional feuds have created the perfect demand for a business like this one. Better yet, many talented outlanders wander the dilapidated peninsula, willing to do just about any old job for some coin. In the days to come, the guild's decisions will matter just as much as the region's most influential power players. However, one must be warned. The consequences for making a hard call and ending up on the wrong side of history can be dire. The Governor. The Governor, Autumn Fulton, rules over Briaria on the authority of the Aluminicilian Empire. His forces, the Imperial Guard, are few and while relatively well equipped, mostly concentrated within the northern reaches of the peninsula, which receive relatively higher safety and supervision than its more dangerous lowlands. The Governor's tax collectors, in contrast, are indiscriminate in their purview of the territory. Imperial influence. The Governor is to Briaria both the face of Aluminicilian power and responsible for the preservation of Aluminicilian values. Aluminicilian, as I'm saying it out loud, crazy long word. I don't know. I'll have to think about that. Oh boy. Like, I've said it a few times now, and every time I'm like, that's a mouthful, and I think that right before I say it. And so, probably something I should think about. Probably a shorter way to do that. Could be Illuminacian. I don't know, that's barely shorter. I'll have to think about it. Anyway, back to your regularly scheduled programming. Despite the Empire's recent lack of support, many loyalists still lie within the peninsula, especially in its most populous cities. Such Imperial sympathizers often hail from patriotic or wealthy lineages, are business owners, or simply have family overseas. Relationships. I have a relationships paragraph, or something similar for each of the different factions. In lieu of Imperial assistance, the Alteran Church has come to the aid of the Governor, bringing with them their knights, healers, scientists, and most importantly, deep coffers. In these trying times, this relationship is doing much to levy some confidence in the region's current leadership. For very obvious reasons, the Governor strongly opposes the work of the Freedoms Company, which would seek to usurp their power and bring independence to Briaria. Fulton's administration is willing to do whatever is necessary to curb this movement. The Traders Union generally supports the current status quo, mostly due to a desire to preserve current international trade routes. The regional government also used to provide research grants to Revelark University, until international conflict tightened its purse strings. The Dawn Choir have remained largely ignored by the governor up to this point, left to their own devices, although many think the church's influence will change this policy of indifference. The Altern Church, one of our two major factions. The Altern Church is one of the oldest organized religions of our world. Its presence is felt across multiple continents, although nowhere is its influence greater than in the country of Aluminicil. The church's deep coffers and plentiful resources are a great boon to any region in which its presence is felt, providing charity and health services to the needy, protection to travelers on the roads, and access to some of the greatest scientific research of the time. The church also brings with it its morals and cultural standards, however. Although they preach acceptance of other faiths on paper, non-clerical applications of the mystic arts are frowned upon. When it can, in regions in which the faithful represent a large enough section of the population, the church's policies tend to become entwined with the law. Alteranism also carries with an inherently aluminocentric streak, its history being irrevocably linked to that of the empire. At the core of Alteran theoretical practice, I think what I meant to write there was theological practice. At the core of Alteran theological practice is the belief that the more moral... Oh, yes. Okay. Whew, excuse me. At the core of Alteran theological practice is the belief that the more moral a life one lives, the better a heaven they will end up in after their death. Each star is believed to be a heaven, and as such, one could truly say that they are staring up at the heavens when they look up at night. The greatest of these stars is the North Star, Alte, brightest in the sky and the namesake of the Alteran faith. Many navigators turn to the faith over the course of their careers for this very reason, having come to rely on the stars to always guide them to where they need to be. The church is also an important investor in Aluminicil's scientific community, inquisitiveness into the natural world being one of its core virtues. So the Alteran Church is in many ways analogous to the Catholic Church in the real world. This actually even extends to the organization's fixation on scientific progress, which I mentioned a little bit earlier, a staple of the Middle Ages. Many of the time period's greatest scientists were sponsored by the Catholic Church, including the man who came up with the Big Bang Theory, actually, who was a Catholic priest. It's something that was used by the church and still is in Europe as kind of an explanation of how God created the universe. Really interesting, or at least it is to me. I don't know. I won't go any further on that topic of discussion. Instead, I will talk about the Freedoms Company, our other major faction. The last decade has hit the southern half of the peninsula quite hard. In Trench Ridge, what was once prospected to be the crown jewel of a thriving Briarian economy was suddenly and dispassionately left abandoned by overseas investors. In Merkmere, years of inconsistent and pulled funding from abroad have left the region's plans for infrastructural reform in shambles and its population isolated. Within the Yammerwoods, the governor's hoarding of military resources have left the trails untraversable, overtaken by beasts and bandits. Born of the bitter disenfranchisement of Briaria's working class is the Freedoms Company, aiming to liberate the peninsula from its intercontinental rulers. The movement has taken the town of Bastionville as its base of operations, renaming it Liberty, and envisioning it as the capital of a future free Briaria. On an ideological level, the Freedoms Company's most educated founders were inspired by the work of Helden philosopher Friedrich Schieber, whose 5 proofs of societal decay have been used to justify the metaphorical amputation of Briaria from the rotten corpse of Aluminicil. Of course, being comprised mostly of blue-collar laborers, tradesmen, and veterans, the organization's rank and file are motivated by a more populist and patriotic rhetoric. A disdain towards traditional Aluminicilian values has led to intense anti-religious sentiments that have been that have resulted in bigotry and violence against many lay members of not only the Altaran Church, but also the Dawn Choir. To a small town, a visit from the Freedom's Company representatives, usually means some amount of strongman / intimidation tactics in the hope of acquiring resources to fuel the revolution. But yeah, so one of the faction's biggest weaknesses is its lack of resources and infrastructure. It's very obvious that even if they succeed in their revolution, Bryaria will see a good few years of suffering before the new government can begin to compensate for the loss of international aid, as little as it may currently be. But the Freedom's Company is kind of an interesting sort of faction. I think maybe our most interesting, right? Something that was very important to me and is very important to me is kind of portraying this duality between our major factions. I think most of the players who are playing this game are going to lead towards the Freedom's Company, you know, and I think that has a lot to do with just the sorts of people. I think anyone listening to this kind of has a general understanding of why we players might sympathize with kind of a more revolutionary faction. And I think they have many reasons to. But what we really want to portray here is, right, that cost benefit, right? That if you really believe in this revolution and its cause and in a free Bryaria, there are costs to that. And those costs are war. Those costs are doing difficult, sometimes nasty things, you know, and having a base that is somewhat motivated by a little bit of maybe not all of the nicest or most educated sentiments, you know. And so the Freedom's Company is really a test to the player of like, hey, how much do you really believe in this, you know? And we want to show some of that like ugly side, and I think it's gonna make the decisions that the player makes all the more interesting, you know. With any luck, we create an environment where people online are debating about which faction is the correct one, you know. And I think that's the home run right there. I say that about a lot of things, and it's true about a lot of things, you know. But you want a good faction system that people are willing and able to debate and talk and discuss about. Anyway, the Dawn Choir. Many of the first settlers to arrive in Bryaria were Felstis. Oh man. Oh, and also, so much of this is like weird in-world jargon that likely won't super show up in the game, you know. But it's important to me to kind of have a basis of understanding of like culture, and some of that comes with just brainstorming terms. I think in the Freedom's Company, I went on a little tangent about like the philosophical work that like inspires the movement itself. I don't expect players to really dive into that. I don't expect us to really do that, but I think it's important when shaping this and making the world feel a little bit more 3D. I'm going to do that again here, so bear with me. Many of the first settlers to arrive in Bryaria were self-described Harkonites, a block of secular purists from Durheld who opposed the then government's embrace of traditional druidic practices. They left the mainland to preserve a bigoted fantasy of Helden culture untainted by mysticism, unaware of those amongst their ranks who silently clung on to the rights of their homeland. In the years of persecution that would follow, the Dawn Choir would form. Built on a foundation of secrecy, its witches would meet in the woods under cover of darkness, spurring rumors of enchanted forests and dangerous magics of the night. In the years since, the culture of the region has shifted and persecution of the Coven has died down, but their culture of stealth and enigmaticism has remained, as well as their deep spiritual connection to the earth and the nature around them. Although for many years the regional government has been content to ignore the Dawn Choir, current events threaten to menace the future of witchcraft on Bryaria. The Altaran Church claims acceptance of other faiths. Alright, we're going to do this again, guys. We got this. We're going to get through it together. The Altaran Church claims acceptance of other faiths, but the Church's stances on the practice of mystic arts would forbid many of the choir's most common ceremonies and rituals if passed into law. The Freedoms Company, on the other hand, has garnered much influence from traditionalist Harkonites within the peninsula, who view the revolution's anti-Aluminicilian rhetoric as an opportunity to establish a more conservative vision of Briarian independence. The choir holds a strong grudge against Revelark University for the perceived crimes of its founder, Helen J. Revelark, who, after studying with witches for many years, published many of the coven's secrets to the public without permission. All right. Yeah, the Harkonites are a thinly veiled, like, kind of Puritan allegory. Sorry, not sorry. I think that's fun. And it, of course, ties into the American history of witchcraft and Protestants and Salem witch trials and all this. This aspect of our world building has kind of a very specific flavor that I think, as we develop it and as it becomes apparent within our writing, will, I think, be recognizable to players. Unlike the other minor factions, which I think have obvious major factions that they lean towards at the start of the game, the Revelark University leaning towards the Freedoms Company and the Traders Union leaning towards the Church, the Dawn Choir is kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place, right? Neither option initially should present itself as the perfect solution to the Coven's desire for religious freedom. Revelark University. One of Briaria's most impressive cultural touchstones, Revelark University stands toe-to-toe with some of the mainland's most prestigious academic establishments. Unfortunately, as the region's economic conditions have fallen, many of Revelark's most promising graduates have sought careers overseas, giving the peninsula a massive brain drain problem. Nonetheless, the university has cultivated a unique brand of Briarian patriotism, fostering students who wish to pay it forward to their home communities and preserve the unique benchmarks of peninsular culture that Aluminicilian collectivism threatens to wipe out. For example, the university has a deep-seated respect for the Dawn Choir's ancient traditions, although the feeling isn't exactly reciprocated. Ideologically, Revelark's staff and students are predominantly in favor of the Freedom Company's dreams of a working-class revolution. The Altaran Church, on the other hand, although unpalatable to the university's deeply ideological academic base, has been known to funnel much-needed funding into local academies in exchange for the following of strict regulations on the study of mystic arts. Also distasteful to Revelark's sensibilities are the practices of the Traders Union, whose shrewd, profit-motivated grip on the peninsular economy is blamed for much of the region's recent socioeconomic divide. Like all those big words, I'm very sorry. Also, I think I'm kind of earning it. I'm like, hey, I'm reading this, and I'm getting through it. So hey, I can use big words if I wanna. It seems that I would be the one who has to deal with them. The Traders Union. Almost anyone who wants to do business in Briaria goes through the Traders Union. Those who don't will find setting up a supply chain to be a very difficult process. The organization is relatively new on the block by the standards of peninsular history, but has accumulated a lot of wealth and power over the course of the past decade. When a store is registered with the Union, it can be guaranteed that their inventory will boast a menagerie of expensive and opulent products unavailable elsewhere in towns. Odds are they can also afford to price common goods lower than their local competitors, driving them out of business. Economic stability is the name of the game for the Union, and the Altaran Church offers a straightforward solution to many of the peninsula's problems. More money. A revolution, on the other hand, threatens to shake up not only transcontinental trade lines, but also many of the international trade agreements the Bazaar has fought so hard to establish. Still, the Freedoms Company's goals of establishing a strong Briarian economy, not dependent on international powers, is an alluring prospect to many merchants. The Yammerwoods has long been inaccessible to the Union, who have long vouched for the terrain's domestication. These efforts have been efficiently curbed by the Dawn Choir, whose cultivation of the forest has forced traders to rely on naval travel for access to much of the peninsula. Alright. Oh man, did we already get through all of our minor factions? Look at that. So, the Lawless. When faced with difficult times, many of Briaria's disenfranchised turn to less than reputable means of putting food on the table. Many of the peninsula's roads and channels have become the stomping ground of thieves and pirates, terrorizing travelers, towns, and boats alike. Most infamous of the peninsula's many criminal groups, Sasha Asterholt's bandits terrorize much of western Briaria, making life very difficult for travelers and merchants to walk the roads of both the Trentridge and the southern Yammerwoods, even when traveling in moderately large caravans. The Blook Creek Gang. This pesky band of miscreants are best known for harassing farmers in the Carterbury countryside. Members are frequently hired as cheap muscle in northern Briaria. Paragon Shepherd, the first ever mayor of Fogwater many years ago. Paragon Shepherd disappeared under mysterious circumstances on the night of his 61st birthday, never to be seen again. Since then, multiple serial killers in eastern Briaria have taken his persona as an alias, making Paragon Shepherd into something of a boogeyman amidst the swamps of Mirkmere. The Silver Teeth. This pirate game is named after the iron spikes that they attach to the sides of their vessels, which they use to crash and cripple other ships. Much of the governor's scarce resources goes into keeping these fiends under control, as left unchecked, they would completely devastate any trade Briaria would hope to have with the outside world. Incredible, and we reached characters, which I'm not done writing. But I will, eventually. Although I don't think it's much of a priority right now. I'm going to be getting back to doing questline stuff here soon enough. But yeah, I think that's it. I think that's all I really have to say. I hope that's all grokkable. And if it isn't, let me know. If you like this video, hit the like button. I don't know. If you like this video, shoot me a compliment. It'll make me feel nice, if you want. Yeah, best of luck on whatever work it is you're doing. I hope you're having a good one, or as best as it can be. And yeah, peace out. And take care.